Welcome to UBI Unplugged, breaking down the future of income. I'm excited for our chat today.
Yeah, let's see if we can actually get somewhere with this. I'm always skeptical, so I'm ready for anything.
Hey everyone, good to be here. Always interesting to dissect these big ideas, especially when they intersect with so many social issues.
All right, so we saw a pretty interesting headline pop up. It's a poll, actually, asking if political talk like student debt relief or UBI might be racially motivated. What are your initial thoughts on something like that?
It's definitely a provocative question. I think it's important to unpack what they mean by racially motivated here, because there's a difference between something disproportionately impacting certain racial groups due to systemic issues and something being intentionally designed with a racial bias. It could be either or something in between.
Right. I think it's a nuanced issue. History shows us that policies, even seemingly universal ones, can have different impacts on different communities. It's not necessarily about malicious intent, but about acknowledging existing disparities. For example, redlining impacted Black communities far more than white communities, and that's still having an effect.
Okay, but if you say UBI is supposed to be asterisk, universal asterisk, how can it be racially motivated? Isn't it literally for everyone? I just don't see how it can be intentionally designed to help one group over another unless you're thinking about A, who gets to design the system?
That's a valid point. It's not like someone's making a UBI designed to say this UBI is specifically for this race, it's designed to be universal. But that's the thing about societal issues, right? Even when the intentions are good, the execution is what matters. And the execution is really complex. The people implementing it, the structures it's implemented in, the surrounding community all play a part.
Exactly. And that's where the historical context comes in. If you have a society where certain communities have been systematically disadvantaged, a flat UBI might not be enough to truly address those disparities. It could actually perpetuate them if not implemented correctly. Also, it could be seen that by helping low-income people, you're helping mostly minorities, as they make up a large portion of the low-income demographic. So it could be argued that's racist, even if it is not at all the intention.
Okay, so you're saying a UBI of, say, $1,000 a month might help a wealthy white person in a rich suburb less than a Black person in a poorer part of a city? That makes sense, I guess. But if you make it different amounts for different people, is it even universal anymore? Wouldn't that cause even more problems?
That's a core tension, right? UBI is built on the principle of universality, and deviating from that could create more social divisions. But I think what person one is getting at is that the starting point for different communities is not equal, and we can't ignore that. It's not just about handing out the same amount of cash, but about ensuring the entire system is equitable and addresses systemic disadvantages. And you would need very careful planning on the side of policymakers to work this out. It's very complex.
Yeah, it's not about giving different amounts directly, but maybe the structure needs to take into account that some people have been denied financial and housing opportunities, and therefore have more needs. So we might need a UBI alongside, for example, increased funding for local communities or housing initiatives so that it has a level playing field for everyone. It is a much broader picture to look at.
That's a good question, and it's the critical lens we have to view these types of massive societal overhauls. UBI is a very complicated program, and you need other programs and social nets to work in tandem with it. So you need all the programs, all the planning, and all the other solutions to be just as thought out.
I see your point, and it's valid. It's not a magic bullet. I think we tend to oversimplify complex ideas. It's a foundational tool, a starting point. Look at student debt relief. Some argue that that mostly benefits the middle to upper class, because they are more likely to go to universities and accumulate that kind of debt, and therefore more likely to be of one specific background. And while that might be partially true in terms of the short term, it's not taking into account the ripple effect on communities that comes from this. It's about creating a more mobile society in the long run. So this debt relief can allow those previously in debt to invest in their communities, build businesses, and create more jobs, etc.
Okay, I see that argument, but then it does seem like some programs help certain groups more than others, even if not intentionally. If you have student loan forgiveness, that helps a bunch of middle and upper class people. Where's the equity in that? How is that different from any other government handout that only helps some folks and not others?
The equity argument is always a sticky one. What is equal can be unfair if the starting blocks are different. It's true that some relief programs help some people more, and that's because some people have more of those burdens. So it's not always just about the immediate distribution of resources, but about the systemic barriers that need to be lowered if we do not address the underlying issues. then we're going to keep facing these issues where some people benefit more than others from these types of government interventions.
Yes, and the equal versus equitable is a really important distinction. Like a simple tax break might help wealthy people much more than low-income people, because they have more to gain a tax break from. Whereas, say, a program that specifically helps the low income may not benefit the wealthy at all. So you need programs that target specific demographics. Like affordable housing initiatives are going to largely benefit people in poorer areas, and who are predominantly minority communities. And you can't really say that it is intentionally racist, can you?
I think the beauty of the idea is in its simplicity, but in execution, it gets really complicated. The goal is to use UBI as a baseline, then work with other policies to address historical inequalities. We can't pretend those things don't exist and hope UBI just fixes everything. It's more about creating a safety net so all can be cared for.
Exactly. The idea of a UBI is that everyone has enough to survive, that the bare minimum standard of living is guaranteed, and after that is up to you. After this base level of security, yes, you will need to consider the historical context. And that's not something that is easy to do. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't. It means you have to take it into account. Studies in places with basic income programs, like some cities in Canada, showed that even with a relatively small amount of money, people were able to go back to school, take care of their health, start small businesses. It's the stability that changes things.
Okay, Canada, I keep hearing about these places, but what about the argument that UBI just takes away the incentive to work? I mean, if you're getting free money, why would anyone bother getting a job? I still don't see a way to get over that major hurdle.
That's a very common concern, and it's not unfounded. If someone knows they can just get a basic income, then they might. I mean, why would you not? But the data doesn't really show this happening in the long term. What the data shows is that people usually want to improve their life, and that free money is a starting point, not the end goal. It's the safety net that allows them to take risks and do something different with their lives, maybe go into a different field or retrain.
Right. People are more motivated by purpose than just money alone. When their basic needs are met, they have the freedom to pursue education, start a business, or engage in creative work. The data from those pilot programs actually shows that people work more when they have that security because they feel empowered, not lazy. They don't need to take a job they hate just to survive and can now look at options that they like, but may not be high paying. It also makes volunteering a genuine option, or community work, or childcare, activities that benefit society as a whole, but are often unpaid.
Okay, I see that. But are we talking about purposes or basic survival? It's hard for me to believe that people will be empowered if the only thing they're being empowered to do is sit at home and watch Netflix. If you're getting $1,000 a month, who's going to be a garbage collector? What if no one wants those essential jobs anymore? We need people to do them, don't we?
That is a really good point, and it's one that needs to be considered. I don't know that free money is really the key here. It's more about making sure that the jobs we consider essential are paid a fair wage. And in a society where people have a safety net, you may be able to get people into essential jobs if those essential jobs pay more than minimum wage. UBI could help shift the discussion away from low-paying or minimum wage work and move towards higher-paying work that is valuable to the public. Maybe people will pick the jobs that we need if those jobs are more valued.
Exactly. It's not that people won't work, but they will be in a better position to demand fair wages and better working conditions. And that's not bad at all. We undervalue so many vital jobs, and UBI can help to address that. We can start to look at a more holistic look at work, where you can value your time doing essential work more than simply getting a paycheck. So maybe people will see essential work differently and take up those positions. We value CEOs 1,000,000 times more than the people making their sandwiches. We should really look at that. We really should.
Okay, but won't all that cost so much money? And where is this money coming from? Like, I am all for making the working world fairer, but I just don't see the economic side of UBI. The numbers have got to be insane. How can you afford to give everyone money for doing nothing?
That's always a million-dollar question, right? The funding aspect is huge. It is expensive. There is no doubt about it. We have to look at existing social programs and see what we can redirect, streamline, or combine in order to make UBI more viable. And we also have to consider the long-term savings we might make from a healthier and more educated population. People who don't have enough money tend to be unhealthier, which in the long run ends up costing the government a lot. But the idea is that if the cost of running the government is streamlined by removing programs, then it may help cover some of the costs. It's a complex equation, and you need to factor in all the variables. It is not simply a case of giving everyone money.
Yeah, we should see this as an investment rather than just a cost. We currently spend so much on welfare, unemployment, incarceration, things that can be reduced if people have a basic level of financial security. Also, consider the increase in economic activity. People will spend that money, which will help boost the economy. And think about the potential tax revenue increases too. If people aren't having to rely on the system, they're more likely to contribute to it. It's a complete reimagining of our economic structure, and it's a challenge to wrap your head around. I understand.
Okay, I'm sort of following, but it still feels like we're just going to be printing money out of thin air, and that always ends badly. Won't it cause massive inflation? I mean, if everyone suddenly has more money to spend, prices will just go up, right?
That's a real concern, and that's where the policy side comes in. You need to be careful about how much money you're putting in the system. You have to control the supply of money and think about supply chains, demand, and taxes. These things need to all be planned carefully before implementation so it doesn't crash the economy. We have to look at other countries that have done these pilots, see what works and what doesn't.
Exactly. It's not about dumping a ton of money into the system overnight. It's about a gradual implementation. In other countries like Canada and Finland, who have done trials, have shown that it doesn't inevitably lead to inflation if done properly. You can actually use UBI as a way to help counter inflation. Also, with automation on the rise, so many jobs are going to disappear, and we need to figure out how to deal with that. UBI could be a way to offset the negative impacts of technology on the job market. People will still want to work, just maybe not in traditional employment.
Okay, so automation. I keep hearing about this. You're saying that robots are going to take all the jobs and that UBI is going to be there to catch everyone. That sounds like science fiction to me.
It's not as sci-fi as it sounds. We already see a lot of jobs being automated, from manufacturing to customer service. And this trend is only accelerating. So we have to look at where the future is going and plan accordingly. UBI may be a useful solution in the face of these changes, a safety net for everyone. And it makes sense if you look at how automation could be done on a massive scale.
Exactly. And if we don't look at solutions like this now, then we'll be playing catch up when millions of people are out of work and without any way to earn a living. UBI can act as a way to adapt to this new world. We have to prepare for the future, and I think it's foolish to bury our heads in the sand and pretend it's not happening. The world is changing, and we need new ideas.
All right, you both are making some points. I can see how UBI asterisk could asterisk be a good idea in some futuristic world where robots are doing everything, but we are not there yet. And even with all those great things you mentioned, I am still struggling with the idea of race playing a role. It just feels so loaded, Like, you're immediately assuming that something that could be genuinely designed to help everyone is really just aimed at helping one group over another, and I still struggle with that.
I think it's important to understand the historical context that we discussed earlier. It's not to say that UBI is designed to be racist, but rather to understand the landscape in which it would be implemented. That's the reality of where we are. And because this country and others have a history of inequality, we need to take all that into account. We should think about how any policy will be received in the context of that history.
Right. It's not about intentionally being racially motivated. It's about acknowledging that existing inequalities can affect how policies play out. We have to keep that in mind when designing these programs to try to create the most equitable outcome. And by not acknowledging it, then we run the risk of repeating the mistakes of the past. I think we need to think about long-term societal benefits, rather than simply thinking about short-term goals.
Okay, I get that. I still have a lot of questions, though. I guess it's like the devil is in the details. You can talk about a UBI being great and changing everything, but without all the details, it feels like just that, talk. And there's still that little voice in my head saying, what about all the people that don't want to work? But maybe there's a point to what you're both saying about people being more productive when they're not worried about survival.
Absolutely. I think that's where the real work is. We need rigorous policy analysis and experimentation to figure out how UBI can best be implemented. And of course, what we talked about at the beginning, the potential for policies to be twisted by existing inequalities and the problems this will cause. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but it definitely warrants more in-depth conversation.
I totally agree. It's not a magic bullet, but it's a critical part of the future. We have to continue to push for conversations like this, to break down the barriers, so we can try to find the best solutions for all. And that means looking at things critically and with open minds, and asking those difficult questions, and trying to see all the angles.
Yeah, well, I'm still not totally convinced, but I am a little bit more open to the idea. Maybe we'll come back to this next week and see if I'm even more swayed.
Sounds good. It's a conversation that's worth having and worth continuing. Thanks for a thought-provoking discussion.
Absolutely. Thanks to both of you. This is a topic that deserves constant discussion. And, of course, thank you to our listeners for joining us on UBI Unplugged. We hope to see you next time.